So, if you've been around here for a while, that I love a question that came directly from this audience. So, today's episode is dedicated to a specific listener. You'll hear from her in just a second, but I just want to shout out everyone that has submitted a question or asked a question in the community because this is really what fuels so much of the content that we create around here. And it's what makes it that much more special. So I just wanted to start today's episode with that and saying thank you to anyone that's ever submitted a question. And we're going to dive into a strategy debate today around if you should create multiple brands for your content. So this is a podcast, a YouTube, a blog. And if you start feeling yourself creatively or directionally pulled in multiple different places, is this something that you should consider? This is a question that I've asked myself multiple times, and I've actually done this a few different times. So I'm going to sprinkle in some of my own personal experiences here today, but let's get right to it. Well, hello and welcome back to the Proffitt Podcast. I am Crystal Proffitt, your host, as well as your podcast coach and content strategist. And some even call me their content therapist because I'm helping you work on the relationship with your content. And like I said earlier, we often have questions from the community, and we are just going to jump right in with Jessica's question. So I'll do these polls from time to time in our communities where I say, hey, are there any specific questions or topics that you want me to cover here on the podcast or in our community? And Jessica says, I have a weird one. And I got to tell you, I love it when anyone starts a conversation with I got a weird thing to talk about today. It just makes me lean in a little bit more. That's like the therapist in me. That's like, ooh, give me the tea. Give me all the good stuff. So she says, I have a weird one. So my husband and I have a joint podcast, Married to the Hustle, geared towards entrepreneurial couples and family-owned businesses. I'm an executive coach and business strategist and have my own brand. My husband is a small business owner and mentor and has his own brand. Do we develop a whole new brand for this joint venture, or do we keep ourselves as a separate brand? So Jessica, again, thank you so much for submitting this question. She is a longtime member of our community, and we'll make sure and link to all of the content that Jessica and her husband are creating. But I did a little chat GPTing for this because I wanted to develop something that we could use. So I'm this is my full disclaimer that I was planning this episode today, and then I was like, we need an acronym. And ChatGPT came through. It came through. It can't the robots were on my side the day that I was planning this content because we came up with an acronym. We together, right, came up with an acronym for B.R.A.N.D. So I'm going to run through what this is, and then we're actually going to go through a little bit more of the tactical and practical things that Jessica or anyone that's listening to this can really go through. So brand, B, the first part of this is benefits and audience synergy. So whenever you're considering, and this is really how just generally I want you to think about whether you're developing a brand new brand, you have an existing brand, you're trying to merge two brands together, what does this look like? So if you look at the benefits, right? What's the big win for combining things together and the risks too? So I'm a huge believer in pros and cons list. My husband and I did this. There was a period where we moved 4 times in 5 years. I know it was from 2012. Let me see. I think that's when we started from 2012 to 2016. Yeah, we moved a lot. Actually, I guess it was 2011 because we moved from an apartment to a house. Then we bought our first house, and then we moved to the house that we live now in Houston. And we were just pros and cons list makers, professional list makers at that point, because we're this is a lot. And you can imagine if you've ever moved just across town, how much of a headache it is. But we also had to consider we're taking kids in and out of schools, and we're moving closer and then further away from family, and the pros and the cons, different parts of the state that we had never been in Texas. And so we were definitely looking at all the pros and cons of these situations. And so when you're looking at your brand, this is something that we did too recently here at Proffitt Media. We recently migrated everything, all of our products in like under one umbrella now. Previously, it was kind of divided. It was still on one platform, but it felt very disjointed. And so we moved everything into one platform where you can visibly see everything that we offer. And it's just a lot for me personally, as the host and the business owner that's conducting a lot of the business behind the scenes and running the operations within the community. It's just so much easier for me. So when I think about the benefits and the risks, one of the big risks for me moving my brand to a brand new platform was losing people along the way, pissing off customers, and having people say, "What are you doing? Like, this is what we know. And why are you moving from one platform to the next?" So there was like a lot of churn. Like, that was my big risky assessment that I was like, "Oh, like this could really be bad for existing customers." But the benefits outweighed the cost of that initial kind of friction that was going to be happening in our brand transition. So when you're thinking about your own brand, if you're going to combine the two together, what does that look like? Does it make your workflow or your operations so much easier? Or is it going to be like, we're going to have to come up with brand new, like, ideal avatars or, people that would listen or consume this content, because right now they're two polar opposites and we don't really know what it's going to look like when we mesh them together. So those are just some things to consider. And actually the next piece of this is the audience crossover. So are both audiences interested in that same content, or is there some conflict? And for when I think about pretty gendered content, which I don't know, Jessica, if yours is like mostly female and his is mostly male, but when I think about gendered content all coming together, it has to just go more high level. And what I mean by that is I will make references to like Emily in Paris in this content a lot of the times. And I'm sure our male listeners, maybe there's some that enjoy Emily in Paris or other like shows that I enjoy watching, but most of the time that's not the case. So I don't like to go too gendered in my content because I am talking to male, female, different age gaps of my, like it's a wide range. I didn't niche down to a very specific subset for a very specific reason. And that's because I want to reach a wider range of podcasters and content creators. And that's something that you have to consider is like, are you going to have to make changes to the content that you're creating? I think about sports podcasts a lot, right? Is like, well, is that going to be gendered, skew more male? And if you're going to combine them together, do you need to not have as many sports references, or are the women in the audience going to get it? It's like these little nuanced gender things that I would consider. But if you're not like really gendered in either of your content, then you're probably good to go. But if you do find yourself with a little bit of a struggle, just bring it a little bit higher level to concepts that a more global audience or a broader audience could really understand. And then the final question for this one, for talking about the B in brand, which is again, is the benefits and the audience synergy, is would this collaboration bring in new clients to each of your individual brands, or would it be a standalone venture? So that's the piece, right? Because we've been talking about the content pieces, but what does this actually look like for both of your businesses? Are you going to have an offer that you're going to create together? And Jessica and I, we actually, when she initially asked this question, we talked about some lead magnet ideas that she could do that would really fit this type of audience. Like, 10 lessons learned from couples that have worked together for 10 years or something. But I think that whenever you're thinking about the content, you have to think about the business aspect of it. Is that going to be a bigger ask to, are you going to have to create a brand new website? Are you going to, just sell the offers on your website or just on his website? Or is it all going to combine together and be like one little happy family in the digital space? Again, these are all questions. I'm not trying to solve any of these problems for you. It's really just things that you should sit down and consider because they're all super, super important. And you want to make sure that you're not confusing your audience along the way. So that is the B, right? First step. The R in the word brand is resources and time commitment. So, time management, if you are already so stretched thin working on your content, he's working on his content, now you're throwing in the mix like this third piece of content that you're going to do jointly together. What does that look like? Like realistically, how much time can you devote to each of these brands without burning out? If the answer is, I really don't know how we're going to do it, then my suggestion is cutting back on the pieces that aren't as impactful and considering what can you combine together. So maybe that's instead of posting on 3 Instagram accounts, maybe you post on 2, right? Or maybe you just post on 1 and you divert people, like you reshare. I see this all the time where people have maybe their main Instagram account that they started a long time ago and it's their personal brand. But then they're like, you know what? I'm going to start an Instagram for my podcast, and they'll reshare their podcast content on their personal brand. So they're not creating both original pieces of content. They're creating one and then resharing it. So you could potentially create one social media account that you're resharing on each of your personal brands. But that's again something that I'm going to defer to you and what your strategies and your goals are on growing your social accounts or your social channels. But absolutely something to consider. And while you figure it out, my piece of advice is to give yourself grace. Lots and lots of grace. If you are just like going through the weeds and you're like, okay, give your like self permission to have an experimental quarter, right? It could be 90 days that you're like, all right, we're going to try this. We're going to figure out what works. We're going to maybe document like what's easy or what's hard or where there's friction or where there's like people don't get it and they don't understand the message. Like document all of that so that in that 90-day period, you can say, okay, we're for sure going to do this. We're not going to do this. And we're going to have it this way for now or the foreseeable future until something doesn't work any longer. And I think that's good advice for anyone. I reevaluate things every 90 days. I go back and I look at my content metrics. I look at the financials. Like this is actually the next point that I was going to make anyway on resources and time commitment is your financials. Like how are you going to split cost or the income? And since you're a married couple, then it makes sense. Like, okay, like do we just need to create another LLC for this separate brand? Do you already each have an LLC that you can run costs through? Or does it make sense? Like this is where things, for tax purposes, let me throw out, I am not a financial person and I am not giving tax advice. That is not my jam. And, we should have someone like we have so much previous content you should go listen to about our financial experts that have been on the podcast. But when it comes to simplicity, this is what I always think about is like, how can we make this as simple as possible? Maybe you run everything through one specific LLC. And maybe you already have that. Maybe you both are running everything through one LLC in your business, or maybe you have 2 separate ones, or maybe you haven't even formed an LLC, which I highly recommend you do, right? Again, this isn't a financial podcast. I'm not giving financial advice, but I can tell you from a personal standpoint, it has made the world of difference knowing that we have an LLC for Proffitt Media. And that's where all the costs, like for equipment that you see here, like doing the panels in my office. If you're not watching on YouTube, we put up acoustic panels in the office. Proffitt Media paid for that. And, it's going to be something that we write off on our taxes because that's how the cost of doing business was passed through the business, but all the income that we make at Proffitt Media doesn't go into my personal checking account, right? It is going through the business and it is completely separate accounts. It is not directly tied into our personal assets. So again, just something to consider is like looking at it from a financial standpoint of what makes sense, what's going to be easy, and then always ask for financial help if you need that from your financial advisor or whoever you're working with. But I definitely want you to consider not just what it is today, but what does it look like in the future? So each of these have a key question, right? We asked the collaboration one about new clients in the last one, but this one is when the venture grows, can you sustain it alongside your current business or will it need full-time focus? This is a question you won't be able to answer right away, right? This is something that you may not be able to answer for 6 or 12 months, right? But if it starts to take off, that is something that you can reevaluate again in that 90-day incremental period. If all of a sudden you realize maybe, Jessica, your business is starting to take off a lot more than this joint venture you did together, or maybe even your husband's business, should the focus be on that one? Or should it be this joint thing that you're doing together has now officially taken off? It's the big thing. Do you both quit the other things that you're doing and just focus on this one? Again, I'm not solving everybody's problems and offering solutions today. I'm just really giving you the hard questions to think about so that you can go back and talk about these things together. And, it's what a good therapist does anyway, right? I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do. I'm just going to give you more homework, more questions, more things to consider. Okay, so that's the B and the R of brand. The A is alignment of values and vision. And what this looks like is the values check. Have you done this before, right? Where you are creating content, you're going to do this new thing. Maybe you're going to take a job, or you're going to, start this new business. And when I look at values and vision, you have to ask the question, like, is this in sync with what you want to do? Are there any potential conflicts of interest? So this would be, I know y'all both are kind of in the coaching mentor space, which I think is fantastic, especially as couples. I think that there aren't enough resources out there for entrepreneurial couples that are working together and sharing like the messiness behind the scenes, right? Like, I work with my husband. I know what it's like when it comes to like sitting down to do the financials and asking questions and trying to understand things that he may be really good at, but I'm not as skilled at, and then vice versa. So I think that it's one of those things that you have to just ask, like, what are the delegation of priorities when it comes to working on something together, especially if you're already in your grooves separately, right? Like, maybe you have your own systems and processes. Maybe he has his own systems and processes, and now you're all of a sudden going to really meld these together. What does that look like? Again, because I'm a list maker and I love a pros and cons list, I love to sit down and say, okay, here are all the things that need to happen in the business. Who's doing what, right? Like, is somebody going to take the more operational standpoint and somebody going to be the more creative outlook, or like have that creative, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the creative workmanship to get the content out. Even though you're doing it together, maybe one of you really loves the editing piece and the other one really loves the marketing piece. Or is that something you're going to outsource? Like, these are the conversations that I would have with anyone that I'm doing business with. And it's just that values check of like, who's doing what, who's the skill, or who needs to skill up, right? Like, maybe that's that investment piece of like, neither one of us are really good at this, but this year and this coming year, we're going to invest in X, Y, and Z to help us be better prepared to handle these things. Or maybe it's outsourcing that task to someone else. But when you think about future goals of this content that you're potentially creating together, a question is, what do you envision for this podcast, or the hobby, or the side hustle, or the empire? Again, this was ChatGPT all the way. Your empire. Like, that's not my default that I go to whenever I'm thinking of building something. I mean, I think that's aspirational, but it's not something that I sit down and think of like, what am I going to do to build my empire today? Maybe I should, right? That's manifesting in its finest. But what do you envision for this podcast? What's it going to be? Is it going to be the go-to resource for entrepreneurial people that are working together, they're couples, or they are maybe just longtime friends or partners? Like, what is this? Like, what is this new thing going to be? And how can it really serve the people that you're already working with or aspirationally want to work with in the future? And then the key question for this one is, will you enjoy working together even if it doesn't go as planned, or is there a risk of clashing styles? So I think that this is a fantastic question, but it's also one of those that, I mean, presumably you know your partner really well. And having these conversations and just talking through the reality of what actually needs to happen will help so many of the conflicts that will arise. You're still going to have conflict. Like, let's just be so honest here. You are still going to have conflict. You're still going to have disagreement. Maybe it's just about strategy. One of you wants to have a 20-minute podcast and the other one wants to have a 2-hour podcast. Like, what are you going to do when there are disagreements? And like, where is the compromise? I feel like now I'm a relationship counselor, right? Like we're a marriage therapist here, which again, absolutely not giving marriage or financial advice in this episode today. But go back to the values that you hold inside your relationship that you want to share within your business and to your communities. I think that that's super important. So that is the B, the R, the A. Now we're at the N, and that is the naming and identity. So the name and the brand identity, is there a compelling joint identity that you can use together, or does one of you take the lead? And I think about a lot of like power couples that I see out in the online digital space. There's a lot of people that work together, and you typically see one of them running one brand, and then you see the other one running another brand, but together they each have a parent brand. So maybe there's one, I'm thinking of Tom and Lisa Bilyeu. Like I see them, if you don't know who they are the founders of the Quest bar. That's what I was saying about like the Quest like nutrition bar, but it like came on to be a lot of other things and it got sold and all this other stuff. But then like they have a lot of like empowerment content that they share, where I feel like Tom is a lot more of speaking to both men and women and anyone that is like ready to hustle and go out there and like do their best. Whereas Lisa leans a lot more towards women stepping into like their feminine power and all the things they can do, but they each have everything under a parent brand. At least that's how their brand is presented to me. So think about the naming and the brand identity. There's also a lot of couples that I've seen that have worked together under one brand. And then for one reason or another, whether it's divorce and splitting up, like they have separated brands, but then some of them still work together under that brand. So it can get really complicated whenever it's like one person is really the face of the brand, but the other person is the COO, or people are trying to work together and then they're like, there's this weird like struggle of power. And again, I'm not suggesting that any of these things are going to happen. I'm just stating facts at this point of what I've seen with a lot of couples that are out there. But again, Jessica, I think that you and your husband could absolutely be the face of like how people do this really well and how people can do this really right. And maybe your content can be the resource that can help them avoid some of these things that happen in the entrepreneurial couple space. And then the visibility piece. So the question is, if your brand becomes successful, which of you benefits most, or do you both equally share the spotlight? And this really just comes down to your own preference. Maybe one of you, like my husband, could care less about being in content on camera.
Morning, Mr. Newsom. How are you, sir? Anything changed since we spoke last time?
Excuse me. Get back.
Do you have any plans to resign?
Excuse me. Let me tell you something. Get up. Dr. Newsom. Okay.
Showing up in my Instagram, like I don't post pictures of my family. There was a time when, my kids made a cameo and like earlier YouTube videos, but I don't show them anymore because this goes back to our values and what we want to do here at Proffitt Media. Like this brand isn't about me. It's not about my kids. It's about me helping people with their content and creating with confidence. So that's how I think about visibility as like, oh, I'm the one that's showing up behind the camera. I'm the one that's recording the podcast, speaking on other podcasts, but behind the scenes, then I have people that are helping me with operations and workflows and editing and making sure that customers are taken care of on the back end. So that's how our business operates. And I think that, again, it's a weird question, but it's a good one to have because it's like, maybe you will learn so much in just asking these questions that one of you is like, oh, well, I really want to do this. The other person is like, great, I have no desire to do that. Or the other one's like, hey, I want to do that too. Like, let's decide who, like, maybe you host a podcast, but maybe I'm the guest and I'm the one that goes out and, speaks on stages or speaks on other podcasts. So again, something to think about. And then the last question for this one is, will you each bring your unique flavors to this joint brand, or are you blending styles so much that it's best to keep things separate? And to dig further into this is like, are you going to show up as a united front and represent this brand? Or are you both going to be kind of like, he leans this way, I lean that way. And that's why we're great, because we're kind of opposites in our approaches to maybe how you coach people. Maybe one of you is like tough love and the other one is like, we're cheerleading, like no matter what happens or what we do. I think that these are just some things to consider, is like, how will you blend your styles, or how will you bring your unique perspectives and views to your content? So that is the B.R.A.N. The last one is the D, and that is distribution and marketing strategy. So where and how? How are you going to market this podcast? And does it fit within your existing platforms? So if you have websites, let's pretend you both have your own separate websites right now. You have your own social media accounts. Maybe you even each have your own YouTube channels and podcast and email lists. Like maybe everything is completely separate right now at this moment. What does it look like when you go to market this thing? Do you need to just create a joint email list and you are still going to have separate brands, but then everybody on the email list gets distribution about your podcast? Or again, with the social media strategy we talked about earlier, are you going to have like one Instagram profile or TikTok or whatever, and then you're just going to repost and reshare on the other ones? Again, I don't have answers for this. I think that it's just going to come down to your bandwidth and what you have the ability to do right now, or what you need to hire out or outsource, or one of you takes this, this specific task and the other takes that. But just think about it. I mean, is it going to be separate or joint promotion whenever you do this? And is the venture marketed under one of your names or both of your names? And I just think cross promotion is the best way to go about this. So now I am just inserting my opinion and what you should do. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying, if this were me, I would say, because I've had this question too. It's like, well, Crystal, why don't you have a separate YouTube channel just for your podcast and then create other videos on your YouTube channel that are about other things? Or why don't you do this with Proffitt Media? Like Proffitt Media needs its own brand and not under crystalproffitt.com. And for me, it's easy. The simple answer is whatever makes my life easier. And because I really come and create content under a personal brand, it's easy for me to just do everything. crystalproffitt.com, Crystal Proffitt TX on Instagram. I'm Crystal Proffitt on YouTube. I have the Proffitt podcast. We have Proffitt Media. Like, it's what makes it simple for me. And if we are starting a brand new brand under Proffitt Media, it's called Podcasters Connect. If you have not learned about it, you can go to crystalproffitt.com/join to learn more. We're actually in the process of rolling out how you can join us. It's not officially open, but you are getting first dibs on everything here. And oh my gosh, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm dying laughing. Jay, you have to keep this in. I'm telling my video editor, the chair that I've had since COVID, and I'm getting a new chair. I need to get a new chair. If you tell people this when I get on a meeting with them, I slowly start going down. It's like, I'll feel it. It goes do-do, do-do, do-do. It's getting I'm going down. Anyway, I digress. I'm getting a new chair. I'm not crowdfunding for it. Please don't send me a chair. I'm going to buy myself, and Proffitt Media is going to buy me a new chair. I need a new chair. But back to your distribution and marketing strategy. The question for this is it easier to push this under one brand to simplify marketing, or is a dual approach more strategic? So I go back to story brand, right? Like the clear message is the clear winner. And if you confuse, you lose. It's so true. It's so true. So if Jessica is on her brand talking about one thing, and then she just happens to mention, oh, by the way, and we're doing this thing together, you should go check it out. And then her husband's talking about one specific thing. And then he's like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm doing this thing with my wife. You should go check it out. It's going to be confusing for your audience, because they're like, well, do I just listen to your thing and then just check that out when I get a chance? Or do I need to just check that thing out? And I also go back to the principle of the one thing. So Jay Papazon, y'all have heard me talk about this so many times. I met with him earlier this year. I met him in person this summer at Craft and Commerce. And then we actually did a coaching call later where I realized I wasn't focusing enough on my one thing. And my one thing now is Podcasters Connect. So this is our brand new membership. It's our brand new community. It's what you are going to get so sick of me talking about because I'm so excited about this. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because you're not going to hear me talk about, oh yeah, by the way, we have, Profit Podcasting, a digital course. We have the Ultimate Podcast Launch Toolkit. We're still going to have all of these products. But the main thing that I want you to do is join us in Podcasters Connect because it's a free community. It's a place for you to get to know other podcasters. It's going to give you direct access to me. So if you've been watching this and, or listening to the podcast for a while and you're like, how do I get Crystal to look at my content and tell me, is this good? Like, it's going to be a place for you to get feedback. It's going to be a place to have sponsorship and promotional opportunities. So that's going to be my one distribution and marketing strategy. And that's what these channels are going to be for. My podcast, my YouTube, it's going to be to do outreach to get people to join us in Podcasters Connect. So Jessica, I encourage you, no matter what decision you make, is you need to decide between the 3 brands. I'll call them 3 for now, right? Because you have yours, you have your husband's, then you have this potential new brand. Which one's going to be the priority? And maybe for now, each of you are still going to have your 2 brands be the priority. And this is just the thing that, it's like, oh, by the way, we're doing this thing. But just know that if you do that, it's always going to be this thing on the side. And unless you put it at the forefront of, hey, my husband and I, we just started this thing. We're launching it. And you have to talk about it. You have to talk about it so much that you get sick of hearing about it. Your audience probably gets sick of hearing about it because they're like, yeah, Jessica, we're already listening. We love it. It's incredible. It's amazing. You have to give it that time and attention. And I think that's where that 90-day experimental trial can really come in to see is this the thing that you want to pursue? Is this the thing that you want to do? So yeah, those are all of my recommendations and questions to ask. So I'm going to go back through. So let's talk about brand one more time. The brand framework today is benefits and audience synergy. That's the B. The R is resources and time commitment. The A is alignment of values and vision. N is for naming and identity. And the D is distribution and marketing. So again, I didn't offer any real resolutions to your problems, but I hope that this was helpful and gave you lots to think about. But again, I encourage you to go check out our Podcasters Connect. You can go to crystalproffitt.com/join. This is hot off the press, recently released. Weren't supposed to open till Black Friday, but here we are. Here we are because I wanted you to have access to this platform as quickly as possible. So come join us, come ask questions. If you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments what questions you have about this brand new community. But before we go today, I have a fan mail shout out from Virginia. So Virginia says, I just wanted to let you know that just last week, Podpage started offering video matching for your podcast uploaded to YouTube. Not sure if you use Podpage or not, but something to check out since I know you do both video and audio. So thank you so much. Okay, so this is from Dan. I don't know why I said Virginia. Dan is in Virginia. That's where this is from. So again, give me a little grace here, guys. I'm still getting new to reading all of the fan mails and the different places and ways we get it. But it says, I heard your recent episodes and wanted to send this quick note. Is from Dan from the new podcast Deep Dive Dialogues. And he says, Crystal, your guidance was invaluable in helping me launch my first podcast. Your support and expertise made the process feel effortless, especially in those early stages. I can't thank you enough for helping me grow. To anyone considering working with Crystal, dive in. She has a gift for making the complex simple and empowering you to take action. You won't regret it. So Dan, thank you so much for your sweet comments and for being a longtime member. Dan has been around for a long time. I was actually trying to remember, Dan, when we did our very first coaching call, if that was in 2019. maybe. Like, it's been a minute. It's been a minute. So thank you so much for being a longtime member of our community. But that's all I have for you today. If you want to submit a fan mail shout out or be featured on an upcoming episode, please go to the audio version of today's episode and click that button that says send Crystal a text message, and you can get a fan mail shout out in the future. But that's all I have for you today. So make sure you are following or subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening and watching. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere.